New Zealand against Italy. Anyone else thought that this could potentially be the game of the weekend? I certainly did. And boy, with the scoreline that we've just seen, was that not the case at all. I'm going to speak about the All Blacks and their performance, speak about the Italians and their performance, and also speak about this result overall and what it means for the World Cup, what it means for where rugby is globally at the moment, with the Italians supposedly being one of those teams that are closing the gap at the moment. There's a lot to get into in this video, so drop a comment down below. What did you make of it? Was it a statement performance from New Zealand, a reminder that they are contenders for this World Cup? And what does it mean about the gap between the best teams in the world and those that are supposedly closing the gap, the likes of Italy, for example? Lots to get into, so drop a comment down below, like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. Let's get into it. So the All Blacks 96, Italy 17. I'll just let that scoreline sink in for just a moment. And I will start with the All Blacks. I'll start with them and then come back onto them at the end of the video, because I think for the most part it is right to give credit where credit is due to sides when they win games. In particular when they win games so comprehensively as New Zealand did in this occasion. What was it? I lost count of the amount of tries in the end. They were completely and utterly dominant. And it was another example actually of when New Zealand are on it, when New Zealand get on top in games, how dominant and how ruthless they can be. And I did a video the other day on the channel where I kind of asked the question of, is everyone sleeping on the All Blacks in terms of who are favourites for this World Cup? And I know it's not going to change after this result. It's still going to be Ireland, it's still going to be France, it's still going to be South Africa that most people would pick to potentially be the winners of the World Cup. But in a way, it was a reminder of why the All Blacks are still worthy of consideration. It was a reminder of their title credentials, because it kind of reminded me of what we saw in the Rugby Championship to a degree, which is when New Zealand are able to boss games, boy do they boss games. When they're good, oh my are they good. They get completely dominant on teams in all areas of the game. When it opens up and when a game is played to their tempo, they can be utterly ruthless. And that's what happened tonight. And Italy just didn't have the credentials, they didn't have the players, they didn't have the game plan to be able to counteract that. So credit where it's due to New Zealand, even though Italy, and I'm going to get onto them, were not great. They did what they needed to do. And when they got on top, they really turned the screw. And actually, I think that's one of the most pleasing areas of this game from an All Blacks perspective, is everything was a little bit negative. After they lost to France in the opening game, people were pretty down on them. They weren't sure where this group was going. And when they got an opportunity in this game, they turned the screw. They put their foot on the throat of the Italians and they made life incredibly difficult for them. And it almost looked like a side that needed a bit of a performance. They needed a bit of a result to kind of get their World Cup campaign back on track. And I think that's ultimately what we saw. And so I have to give credit to them for doing that. But let's get on to Italy. Italy are not an awful team. We've seen them in the Six Nations push. I remember watching the game up at Murrayfield, and Scotland were lucky to hang on in that game. Italy should have beaten Scotland. They did pretty well against the French as well in the Six Nations, and we'll look back on that game at some opportunities they missed, which is why I think this result is so polarising in a way, because many of us, myself included, thought this would be the game of the weekend. This was the game where there was potentially an upset. We thought New Zealand would ultimately win, but you thought if there was going to be a big upset, maybe a real result to rock the World Cup, this could potentially be it. Italy are supposed to be a side that are closing the gap, and they were terrible. Pretty early on in the game as well. It didn't take much for, I think, heads to drop. I look at I think it was the third New Zealand try, so still fairly early in the game, where they just scored a try, they kicked off, they went the length of the field again, and yes, there were some lovely lines in there to break through the midfield, but the tackling from the Italians' point of view was all over the place, and that's something we saw throughout the game, and that's just one area, but to me suggests that the Italians, for whatever reason, mentally were just not in the right place for this game, or certainly once they went a couple of scores down, they were not mentally in the right place for this game, and they were, I mean, it was as bad a performance Italy have probably produced in many a year. What it does for their preparation for that crucial game they've now got against France, I don't know. Is it such a bad performance that after that they have to get better? It will focus the minds in training this week. Or was it such an abject display? Were they blown away so comprehensively on the biggest stage, and supposedly as a team that are closing the gap on the best nations, is that just going to be demoralising? And is their chance of doing anything against France now completely blown out the water? I don't know. It might sound harsh on the Italians, but they were truly, truly awful. And it kind of brings me on to my main point actually from this video, from watching this game. This is a terrible result for the Rugby World Cup. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to the All Blacks. They were dominant, they were excellent, they were ruthless. It was a reminder of how good they are and why they could potentially win this World Cup. And from an Italian point of view, I've just been speaking about how poor they are, but it's just not a good result for the competition. Look, let me put it this way. It's one thing for Namibia and Romania to have almost 100 points put on them. And we can all kind of look at it and say, well, there's a huge disparity in terms of resources. Half of those other teams are semi-professional, coming up against fully professional players and against some of the best in the world. It's still not good when Namibia and Romania have 80, 90, almost 100 points put on them. But we can kind of write it off and explain it. When Italy almost have 100 points put on them, even against the All Blacks, it's a lot harder for us to explain. Like, this is the exact sort of result that if you've got mates who aren't that into rugby, you're trying to get them into the World Cup, they'd look at this and just say, why am I bothering? And again, it's not New Zealand's fault. I'm not criticising them here. I'm saying generally for the competition, it's poor because it's a reminder of how stark the gap is between the best sides in the world and the supposed chasing pack. And actually, I think it's something that is really going to come into sharp focus when we get to the semi-finals. I think the quarterfinals at this World Cup are going to be brilliant. Again, going back to the draw we've got and how we're going to have some incredible quarterfinals involving France, Ireland, New Zealand, probably South Africa as well. Those teams on that side of the draw, it's going to be really good. And even on the other side of the draw with England and Wales and Fiji, Argentina, it's still going to be good because those sides are of a similar level. Where it's going to be an issue is at the semi-final stage. And again, I think that will be a time in this competition where we see the real difference between these sides. And it was a reminder of that tonight. This was a Six Nations team who, compared to a lot of other teams and smaller nations in the world, get a pretty good opportunity to try and bridge that gap in terms of regularly playing some of the best in the world. I know the resources aren't the same, or the quality of their teams at an amateur level, or the grassroots game, playing numbers, all that sort of stuff, but they're part of the Six Nations. And that's why I think this result is almost damaging, I think, for the World Cup. It is a real shame. But as I say, congratulations to New Zealand. Let's finish on them. Their set piece was unbelievable once more. It's something they have improved this year. If it can continue to be that sort of level, then I think they will be able to compete with the best teams in the world. And it was also another thing of when they get front foot ball and when they can dictate a game, they are unreal. I know inconsistency is the issue for New Zealand, and the thing that you could easily throw at them in this game is they weren't challenged whatsoever, and that would be absolutely accurate. But I still think if they can get on top, even for 10, 15, 20 minutes in a game, even against the best teams in the world, they can cause people quite a lot of discomfort. They can make things pretty uncomfortable for those best teams. I still wouldn't have them in front of France, Ireland, South Africa in terms of World Cup favourites, but they are right there if it clicks for them. And it is a big if. So those are my kind of thoughts on the game. Let me know what you made of it down below. So much to get into. Brilliant from New Zealand, awful from Italy, and a result which is terrible for this World Cup. Not even talking about New Zealand or Italy. It's not personal to those teams. Talking about purely this result. The two teams involved in terms of where they are in the world rankings and their reputation. What it means for this World Cup is, I think, really not a good thing. But you can let me know in the comments section. Make sure you like the video and also subscribe to the channel. Let's get towards 10,000. That's the aim. Let's get there. But nice one. I'll see you in the next one.